think this is an important topic for Christians today to consider because we all live in a culture around us and we relate to it in specific ways. But we sometimes don't think about how culture influenced the earliest believers. A lot of times, in fact, we have an idealized vision of what the early Christians were like. They were so much better than us. Well, actually, they weren't. And that's my point. In looking at cultural Christians in the early church, I try to bring out the ways in which the culture all around them tripped them up in ways that are actually quite similar to how our culture affects our lives and trips us up on a regular basis when it comes to the way we think about just about every aspect of life, from finances, relationships, materials we read or listen to, and so on. What do we surround ourselves with? What do we fill our minds with? The earliest Christians were very much part of the Roman culture, and we are part of the Roman culture of our day, if you will. But a related issue is that so many Christians today have a very inadequate understanding of the early church, and in fact would be quick to tell you that they don't know much about its history. If that describes you, I hope that you will get to learn something about the history of the early church from this, and that it will help you relate better to the Bible in particular, because the Bible very much is grounded in that historical context. So history and theology, as Augustine so famously kept pointing out, are closely connected. This is not an easy book in some ways. Don't get it wrong, I think ancient history is quite juicy, and I try to keep a lot of those juicy bits in there. But the reason that I say that this is not an easy book is because it is a convicting book. My point in every chapter, in every case study that I present here, is that a lot of the sins, the cultural sins that the early Christians were struggling with as cultural Christians, are sins that are present in our own lives, our own churches. That's not easy. We would like to think of ourselves as, better than we are, and early Christians probably would have liked to think of themselves as better than they really were. And in fact, we have primary sources that tell us that. But the point is, if we want to genuinely pursue God, pursue the truth, pursue sanctification, we need to be convicted in our own sinfulness. And sometimes that means recognizing the historical baggage that we're all dealing with as well. When I think about what you will gain from this series, I hope that you will gain a better understanding of the early church and the people who lived in the first 5 centuries of the church's existence. And in particular, what I think about in this regard is how those connections will help you relate to the Bible. We think of the world of the Bible as something so distant, so long ago, ancient history, right? We use that term to mean something so long ago that it's irrelevant to us. And yet Christianity is a faith that's rooted in history. We believe something today because it really happened. And so understanding the stories and the challenges of the early Christians is faith building to us as well. And it will hopefully really enrich the way you read the Bible when you understand that these are people who are struggling with exactly the same kind of issues that we are today as churchgoers. This video series proceeds chronologically, taking you from essentially the days of Paul to the days of Augustine and a little bit beyond. So we will go through the first 5 centuries of the existence of the church. And the way we will do it, in each lecture, we will consider a particular topic, a particular type of cultural sin that people struggled with. We will start with, for example, attitudes towards finances, as we look at Ananias and Sapphira as our first textbook cultural Christians. We will also look at food, how attitudes towards food and drink affected early Christians as they were living in the Roman Empire, and of course, how it affected Jewish converts to the faith. We will also look at sexuality and the question of the presence of women in the church. To what extent were Roman cultural attitudes towards women an issue as well? We will continue and finally conclude with the what-if scenario of what would it look like if people just decided, you know what? Christians are too sinful. I'm quitting all of this and moving to the desert, literally. Why is this still a solution of cultural Christians? But through all of this, the key is that we will bring those applications to the present, because every single example of cultural sin that we will discuss first and foremost in the early church has direct application and connection to us in the present. All of those sins are present in the modern churches as well. But in a way, it's also the encouraging part of this story that we are connected historically and theologically to these people from 2,000 years ago. Their stories are our stories also, but also we can continue to grow in our own faith walk, just like they tried to do. One of my personal favorite stories that I write about in the book and talk about in this video series is the story of Simeon Stylites, the pillar saint. This was someone who really wanted to escape it all. You know, people around are so sinful, right? So you can get away from them and live a life of solitude, free from sin, free from any problems. Well, so he moved to a ruined area and settled on a pillar, initially just 10 feet off the ground. The problem is people kept coming to see him, so he kept moving higher and higher up, and eventually he spent the last 30 years of his life on a pillar that was 50 feet off the ground. And it's kind of funny, although it probably wasn't funny to him, and people kept coming to see him. And to me, this is a great example of how you can't get away from all these sinners that you have to see sometimes every Sunday and worship with them and all of that. Try as we might to escape the people around us, we just can't get away. But the question is that really a bad thing, or is this an opportunity for growth? And so this is an example of a story that is in some ways relatable, because for me, sometimes I'm thinking like, I'd really like a break, and I'm a mom of 3 kids. I'm not getting a break most days. But that's the point. We are serving, and trying to get away is just not going to work. If you're ready to see how the early church and the struggles of the earliest Christians connect to your own struggles today, join me in this series as we explore cultural Christians in the early church and ways in which their stories have such surprising applications for our own.